The four of you, thank you for being here. It's incredibly important to be able to be in this conversation, and I really appreciate you getting this out, getting it on the record, and so we can continue to be able to build on the conversations we've had in past hearings and to work towards actual solutions. Chairwoman and I have talked about these issues often. We bring these issues up, and we're working towards actually getting to pragmatic solutions, as some of them have even been mentioned today in some of your opening testimony. So I appreciate that very much, and we'll look forward to ongoing dialogue with that. We are at a critical point. We have quite a few federal employees that are eligible for retirement. It continues to drag on with the hiring and the length of time it takes to hire. The latest numbers that we have is now 92 days to be able to get to a hire. That is actually better than it has been by a few days, but still embarrassing for anything that is in the private sector. I've yet to run into a single company that goes to a job fair, interviews someone at the job fair, and says, "I'll get back to you in 3 months," in the process. We're at a very difficult spot to be able to get through the hiring time. We've got to be able to make some decisive steps to be able to get to the future, and that is going to begin with improving our hiring process, and hopefully we'll begin with some of the conversations we have today. Best and brightest candidates really are not going to wait 3 months to be able to go through the process. And as I've talked to several folks, the folks that work in federal warehouses and others that have other options for other jobs they could literally start on this afternoon are certainly not going to wait 3 months to be able to go through that process. In 2019, the Commission on National Military and Public Service made recommendations to increase our ability to hire, train, and retain federal employees. The Commission noted that federal human capital policy is often focused on short-term fixes, which added more complexity to the federal hiring system, as has already been mentioned today, with over 100 different hiring authorities there. Whenever we have a hearing on this topic, that always comes up, is the number of hiring authorities, and just about everyone brings up at some point direct hire, expedited hiring, non-competitive hiring every time, and to say, we have 100 different authorities, we don't like any of them, or we only use a fraction of those. Our hiring system is definitely broken, and it shows every time we get to one of these hearings and someone else asks for another way to be able to get around it. We've got to be able to resolve that. The COVID pandemic, I also declare to be the largest pilot program ever done by the federal government on innovation and managing people and hiring and no basic oversight. We should take the lessons learned from that and start implementing them quickly. My fear is that after a 2-year large-scale pilot, that we're now going to start studying what we studied during that time period and spend another decade trying to evaluate, and the status quo will just remain. That will be disappointing if that actually occurs. At this point, we've got to be able to resolve some things. So let me just lay a couple of things on the table that I want to be able to talk about as well. We have highly qualified spouses of our active duty military who move with their family every 3 years, often to very remote location at bases and posts around the country and around the world. They struggle to be able to find employment when they move every 2 or 3 years. Why not allow those spouses of our active duty military to be able to work in a remote position in any agency they choose to? We've clearly shown that remote work is possible. And I don't mean telework where they're expected to be in 1 day a week. I mean truly remote work, where they're never expected to be in unless there's a large-scale conference that they need to be able to attend. This would also dramatically open up opportunities for highly qualified individuals in rural America that struggle to be able to find good jobs. This would help those in rural America and would help rural America having stable income into some of those communities where highly qualified individuals could remain in rural America but still be able to work in different jobs in our federal government as they're doing remote work. It would also help folks that are already in the federal family that may work with DHS and work in remote border stations. And that spouse of that individual that's serving our nation would like to have the option to also be able to work in the federal family. These are pragmatic issues that we need to be able to learn from the pandemic and to be able to determine how can we actually turn what was really a painful season into new opportunities to be able to reach out to additional new highly qualified individuals to make our government even run more efficiently in the days ahead. So there'll be quite a few different issues that I want to be able to discuss on this, including the relationship with the Chico Council and OPM, and to figure out who's got what in what lane and how do we actually simplify that process. I look forward to the ongoing dialogue as we go through this and getting a lot of your testimony on the record for work in future days. Madam Chairman, thank you. Well, I will try to get my questions down to less than 25 minutes, and then we'll see where we can go from there. Let me open this up for some dialogue here as well, and I appreciate all your input and what you've written in this. And Ms. Bailey, I hope you publish what you put out at some point, because your biography that you have at the beginning of your written testimony of kind of walking through that journey is very insightful to be able to go through all that. But I'd like to just throw a question on the table and have us interact on this. This seems like a tremendous amount of bureaucracy to be able to manage people. And if I can go back to Ms. Bailey's conversation on her saying this is a multi-billion-dollar organization, you're coordinating human capital for 200,000 people, yet you have people above you trying to instruct you on how to be able to do your job. You made the comment saying, I've got this. I would define it better of, if you don't trust me, don't hire me. And what it really feels like at this point, much of what OPM's job seems to be is, I don't trust the people under me, and so I'm going to micromanage them. The Chico Council is trying to be able to swap ideas and to be able to figure out who's doing a better idea, who's figured out how to get around one of these 100 hiring authorities and figured out how to be able to make it work, who's figured out how to be able to manage people remotely and in telework and other things. And OPM's main job seems to be to say, no, we're going to think about this and we'll get back to it in a year or two. There's a lot of interplay that's happening here, a lot of conversation and dialogue. What I'm trying to figure out is, where is there redundancy and there could be authority put down to be able to make decisions. We don't need 104 hiring authorities. We don't need 105. We need to figure out how to be able to hire, have a specific set of requirements on that, and oversight for individuals that are not doing it well, that are not hitting their targets on it. So how do we deal with this balance between OPM and the Chicos? And I'd love to throw some things on the table and actually get out there what you really want to say. Can we do that? Ms. Bailey, can I have you start first, since you kind of opened this conversation with, we've got this?
Yes, thank you, Senator Lankford. You know, I think one of the bottom lines is that so many of our laws and rules and regulations and everything are actually written, quite frankly, for the 3% of the workforce, or the 3% really of society that aren't going to follow them anyhow. And so what we've done is we've built an entire system based on distrust. Everything is about whether or not we think an agency is going to do something nefarious. And I think for OPM, and I was there for 7 years, and I loved my colleagues. They're incredibly bright, they're incredibly talented, and they know what they're doing. But their customer is Title V. It's not the agencies. It's to protect Title V at all cost. And so when you're protecting a law and you're not actually dealing with the realism or the practicality of what an agency is actually trying to struggle to do, there's always going to, I think, be just a situation where we're banging heads with each other. Every single day as a Chico, and yes, over my 40 years, and in particular as a DHS Chico, every single day was about hiring high-quality individuals. I do not think we need 100 hiring authorities. I've always argued we need 2. One, we need one that I think protects, or at least gives veterans, our veterans, an opportunity to get employment within the federal government in recognition of their service to the United States. That's number one. Number two, we need a hiring authority for all others, and it should be from all sources. It shouldn't be, there's nothing in the law that says that we have to use USA Jobs. That is done through a regulation that was passed many, many moons ago, and it is incredibly outdated. When we go to a hiring event, I should be able to have the ability to have a conversation with someone, be able to collect their resume, have that conversation, match them up to what skills or what positions I have, and then be able to offer them a position. Those are the kinds of things. Now, should we, I think your Chance to Compete Act that Chairwoman Sinema has put in place, or is working to get passed, is actually something that would be beneficial to us, because in that regard we would be able to at least have really good assessments to be able to get those high quality folks. We can actually hire people within one day. I've proven that in DHS. We had a cybersecurity hiring event. We made job offers in one day. So it is possible to do this, but it takes having subject matter experts involved. It takes having the ability to use the right appointing authorities and just making sure that HR and the managers work together to accomplish that. But again, I hope I'm answering your question. And I will yield here so
Let me
others
ask this,
have an
Mr. Regas,
opportunity.
what's the problem with that? Why do we get this interplay back and forth between OPM and the Chicos? And they have personal good relationships, but there seems to be overlapping responsibilities.
Yeah, I completely agree with almost everything Angie said there. So one of the things that when they say they have to come to OPM for a Mother May I, like we want permission to do a Vera VSIP to offer bonuses for folks to retire early, or approving bonuses for employees over $10,000, those are in statute required by agencies to go to the OPM director for approval. And I remember signing off on these saying, what do I know about this employee at USDA that I'm approving a bonus over $10,000? Nothing, other than the glowing write-up about what they did and they achieved. That is something that Congress should look at and put back into the purview.
How do we get that list? How do we get the list of all those things? This goes back to if I go to DOD and they say, is anyone reading these reports? We send you 5,000 reports. Does anyone read all these? We have this monster staff
Yeah.
that's all they do with these reports. We don't think anyone reads it. How do we get the list of those items? Because in all likelihood, most of those pieces of legislation where someone did something dumb, to go back to Ms.
Yes.
Bailey's comment, at some point it made the news and Congress passed something and said this is never going to happen again.
Right, yeah, it's literally right in Title V. The $10,000 bonus is right in Title V. The Vera VSIP is in Title V. And I think Congress is correct in wanting some kind of check or watchdog to make sure that there aren't abuses when these things happen. But that could also be done by the agency's own Inspector General can take a look at these items rather than going to OPM.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gurdon, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes, sir, thank you. A couple of recommendations that we've made in the OPM assessment. One is that OPM really needs to be refocused beyond Title V. If you think about the Chicos as their strategic human capital officer within agencies, you want OPM to be the president's strategic human capital advisor. And so we need to refocus it so that we have a comprehensive but strategic organization there at the center of human capital, so that they're thinking about data analytics, they're thinking about lessons learned, they're thinking about training, they're thinking about the future, but that the actual responsibilities to manage the HR community and the workforce in those agencies is delegated to the experts in that agency. So first, we actually do make a recommendation in that report about the specific revision to authorities for OPM in Title V. The second thing I would say is that in association with that reframing so that OPM becomes a more strategic organization, we need to take them out of the compliance mode, which again, as Mr. Regas has said, is really, many of those are articulated in law, and put them into the modern form of risk management, so that where the data shows that there is opportunity or risk, OPM can take a strategic focus there, but they can leave the majority of compliance to the executing agencies. That empowers the Chicos to do what they need to do within the framework that is established, and moves OPM into that strategic management role for the entire federal workforce, so that Chicos can do what they are already empowered and able to do, but in a system that actually matches those authorities.
So OPM moves from a compliance organization, and Mother May I, to use your term on that as well, to more of a conversation from the executive branch. Say we have 45% of all federal employees suddenly eligible for retirement. What are we doing about this? How are we helping protect the federal workforce in the days ahead? And then trying to initiate initiatives to be able to help offset that, correct?
Exactly. And right now, OPM can't even see that data because it's not integrated across the enterprise.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you. Mr. Lankford, let me continue this conversation I started earlier on remote work. Just from your own perspective here, I know there are multiple members of the federal unions that are remote working or they telework. What's your initial concern on a higher number or higher percentage, I guess I should say, of federal workers? Doesn't necessarily increase the number of federal workers, but a higher percentage of those federal workers that are doing work literally all over the country. Military spouses of people that have other federal jobs that are in this federal family, work in a remote area, people that work in or that live in very remote areas, in rural areas, having access. Do you have any concerns on that from the union side?
No concerns. I mean, it's an excellent question, and I think the idea of remote work opens up a world of possibilities. It solves a lot of our problems with hiring in terms of people having to move to a certain location to do a job that they could do somewhere else. I think it's absolutely the gold standard for a lot of our military spouses that keep moving around with their spouses. They get deployed in different places, even overseas. You can absolutely log on from overseas and continue working and doing your job in some, number of federal agencies. I think that is an excellent perspective ahead, and I think we have a lot to work on doing that. Now, the good news is with COVID, if anything good came out of COVID, the one thing is we were forced to learn how to remote work, and we were forced to learn how to telework, and no way would we have gotten this far or have this kind of data and interaction if we weren't forced to do this. So we're at a place right now where I think that we're much more accepting of the idea of remote workforce, the benefits of it, in terms of managing and ensuring performance and so forth. And I think it's a huge opportunity for the federal government to open up hiring to a lot of people that ordinarily wouldn't be able to hold these jobs.
Yeah, I'd agree. Ms. Bailey, how does this actually get implemented? What legislative authority is needed? What are right now agencies and Chicos right now have the ability to be able to start listing jobs as an assumed remote work? Or it could be, I guess it could be listed either way. It could be either be someone that's hired in to be able to come into work in the agency, or they could be actually full-time remote and really give them either option on that. Is there any barrier right now legislatively to doing that?
There's not a single barrier. We've always had the ability to offer remote work. It's all based on where the duty location, wherever you want to define a duty location, that's where it will be. If it's someone's home, if it's working out of the YMCA, if it's working in a military installation or at a border patrol station, anywhere you identify that being the duty location is where the person can work. So there's never been a barrier to remote work.
All right, so two big issues then. One is supervision, and the other one's culture. Because some people are going to say, I need to see all of the chicks in my nest every single day to know that I can lay eyes on them or I can't manage them. Others are going to say, you never see them anyway. And so what is the difference here on it? So let's talk about culture and let's talk about supervision in that. What are the two barriers that we have?
All right, so both of those are, I would say culture is probably the biggest barrier. It's this belief that just what you just said, right? That everyone has to be sitting all around me. But what I used to say to my supervisors or my executives all the time is, you don't know what people were doing today anyhow, right? Because you're not leaving your office. Even take myself as the Chico. I had 350 employees who worked for me. I had to trust that they were doing their job, whether they were in the office, whether they were across the country, whether they were at the beach. I had to trust that they were actually getting the job done. It's about results. It's about holding people accountable and making sure that you stay in constant touch with them. When you're in these kinds of environments, it's that what you really need to do is concentrate on, again, the accountability, making sure that we get results from folks, and if not, take appropriate action for their inability to either that they can't do the job or they won't do the job. And the second thing is that you should have opportunities for people to come together, whether it's to celebrate, to collaborate, to create. There's always going to be opportunities in which you should bring people together because human connection is still important, right? And so that's the one thing. So from a supervisory standpoint, it is no different, honestly, than if they are across the hall, because half the time you have no idea where they are or what they're doing anyhow, because again, most of the time you're not leaving your office. The second thing is, though, that you talk about is culture. And you cannot legislate culture, just like you can't legislate good management practices, right? And so one of the things that we really have to do, I do believe that the pandemic has helped us at least understand from a culture standpoint, but I will tell you from a DHS standpoint, when I was there, I had to also think about the fact that I have employees who are also still on the front lines, right? So I couldn't be so DC-centric, office-centric, and only think about remote work without thinking about what it's like for the man or woman who's on an ATV or a horse or, doing any of the other things that our folks, our men and women had to do. And so it's being able to, I think, wrap your arms around all this and culturally drive for excellence, culturally drive for hiring high-quality employees, culturally drive for engaging with them, and starting from a basis of trust. And again, that can't be legislated. It's a leadership issue. It begins with leadership, setting that kind of culture and that kind of environment, and then absolutely driving that, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up. It takes everybody if you're going to actually, I think, really be able to have this kind of environment that I think you're seeking.
Yeah. Mr. Rigas, one of the things that I hear often from different agencies and different Chicos is they want a good list of highly qualified individuals to be able to choose from. And I hear it all the time to say, OPM provided XYZ, or whoever it is provided XYZ list. I look at the list, I look at the opportunities. I don't have highly qualified individuals here. Where do I go get more? This is a way to be able to say, there's 300 million plus Americans here. You could literally hire for this job from anywhere in the country on it. You just got to be able to list it, advertise it, engage with it. You've got to be able to have the ability to be able to actually hire people in a timely basis to be able to do it, but they could be from anywhere. What are the barriers to this that you see with OPM, and how do we move into let's hire more highly qualified individuals regardless of where they are in the country?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the initiatives we pioneered when I was acting director was moving more towards skill-based assessments rather than candidate self-assessments.
Right, where I get to check the box and say, yes, I'm very qualified.
Right.
Okay.
And what happens there is because embedded in our merit systems principles is veterans' preference, everyone who checks off that they are most qualified, including veterans, you end up with a cert which has veterans as the top 3 individuals, and people say, well, all I get are unqualified veterans. We need to get rid of veterans' preference, and that's completely wrong. What's wrong is you have everyone self-selecting themselves as highly qualified. So what you need are skills-based assessments, and in that environment, you will get, and as I demonstrated in my opening statement, very highly qualified candidates, and oftentimes more qualified candidates than you have positions for which you can hire at your agency, which brings my second point in, which is shared certificates. You can take that shared certificate and say, hey, I got 8 qualified candidates for this position. I only needed 2. Does DHS or another agency need this HR specialist or an IT specialist that we've already determined is highly qualified? They could then hire off of that cert, drastically reducing hiring time for the federal government.
Right. But we're back to Ms. Gertzen's statement earlier. That is a shift and a focus for OPM to say I'm a facilitator to these individuals that are actually doing it rather than a permission compliance-based group, but really trying to be able to facilitate that. And Ms. Bailey mentions earlier, there's really just 2 hiring authorities that are needed, one for veterans and one for everybody else. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen that proposal. I mean, I think we certainly need to reduce the number of hiring proposals. The shared certification initiative I mentioned, HHS is already doing that within the many agencies under their umbrella. It doesn't require permission from OPM to do that. Other agencies can do that. Chico led at their agencies on their own right now today. That was something I was pushing for at OPM in 2020. We ran out of time to make it a government-wide initiative so that when you apply for something on USA Jobs, you can either click a box, either opt in, or maybe we could make it that you have to opt out if you don't want it shared, but that you are immediately, if you are deemed qualified for this job, you're hired, and you are not hired, that any other agency in the federal government would then be able to hire you.
Madam Chairman, can I ask a couple more questions? Yes. Okay. Shorter resumes, opportunities to not have the long written statement for certain levels, that you've got this basically fake paragraph or fake piece that someone else actually you hired wrote for you to be able to then turn in, which has become common in the process. The self-certification. What we're trying to figure out is how do we clean up this whole hiring process, or to be able to say if they're listed in some other platform as some other job platform, a search platform out there, that also they could be then picked up by the federal government as well based on the resume they have there and the skill set be able to fit. What is wrong with any of those?
Yeah, I think that all of the above approach is exactly what we need. You need short, clear job descriptions, which are easy to understand. You need to have the HR folks working in conjunction with subject matter experts who can then, the hiring managers are ultimately the ones who determine whether an individual is qualified or not. So that interaction needs to happen early in the process so that the job posting that the hiring manager wants and the HR specialist are working together to ensure that the assessment correctly reflects what is needed in the job, and then you can have either interviews or writing samples or one final step to ensure that you have the most qualified individuals, and you can move right to hiring.
Yeah, as long as the writing sample is actually that person writing.
Right.
But right now, we assume quite a few of the writing samples are actually someone else writing it for.
Right, yeah. So if you have a multi-step process, that mitigates against any one of those sort of being faulty.
What about the opportunity if they've got the resume listed on LinkedIn and it matches what somebody's looking for at DHS, that DHS is able to go pursue them and say, hey, this matches up?
You could certainly do that, but you also have to be careful with merit systems principles. You have to make sure that a position is publicly announced and competed.
No, I get it. It's publicly announced, it's out there. But if their qualifications match what's actually been listed, those folks they are being pursued by private companies. They're just not being pursued by the federal government. They may have never considered working in IT in the federal government, but would be very interested in that if only they heard about it, but they've never considered it.
Yeah, I think-
Again, if you're in rural Oklahoma, you've not met someone who's worked for the federal government before. You've never considered that until suddenly it pings up and says, I have the qualifications to do this. And they think, I'm going to consider something I've never considered before. Now we're actually recruiting into areas where people would do remote work or possibly even relocate to be able to do it. But the authorities have to be there for the agencies to actually go pursue people and then to be able to get them in the process.
Yeah, no, I think that would be totally fine. Reach out to them and invite them to apply, absolutely,
Right.
Yeah.
But it's got to take less than 90 days to go through the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or 92 and a half as it is currently.
You ought to be able to hire someone and get them in a seat in under 30 days. And I think that's possible, and I think it can be done if we do the right thing.
Ms. Bailey's hired people in one day before.
Right.
So it's doable. So any other comments on this? I know I've gone way over on time, but I want to be able to make sure we get as much as we can on the record.
Senator, if I can just mention one other thing. So DHS is our Title VI, which I don't know if Senator Carper's still on, but I do want to thank him for actually introducing that and giving us that authority. Our cyber talent management system is civil service reform. We completely reinvented everything with regard to recruiting, hiring, pay, compensation, has market-sensitive pay, has the ability to hire, somebody that just comes out of high school and has been able to win a national hackathon as a qualifying factor, right? So it's really thinking about not just today, but into the future. OPM supported that, OMB supported it, and it actually has become a reality. It was implemented November 15th of 2021. So it is my recommendation that your subcommittee take the time to sit down with DHS and have them walk you through all of the benefits of that, because what you will find is that, and one of the things that we've agreed to, is that we would give that playbook to everybody, to every federal agency. So if you were to take Title VI and amend it from just being for DHS and amend it to all federal agencies for all federal positions, you would have civil service reform. And so it took us 7 years to do it, right? It took a tremendous amount of time to peel back the onion on everything, because when you throw away OPM's classification and qualification, you have to actually know what the heck you're doing in order to then be able to build a system for the 21st century.
Senator Lankford, if I might make one point towards
Go ahead, if you're okay with that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Your point about military spouses. When I was at Department of Labor in the Veterans Employment and Training Service, we worked diligently with the private sector on military spouse hiring. And just as an example, USAA, who of course is a very focused veteran employer, was anxious to bring military spouses on, recognizing the value of that hiring pool. They started a program where military spouses, regardless of where they were, could be trained as insurance adjusters and call center operators. So they could be anywhere and support USAA. That grew into strategic career development paths for military spouses, recognizing that they were highly qualified, could move around the world, be USAA's hands and feet, basically, in all kinds of places. And USAA's model expanded further in the private sector. To Senator Carper's point about the need to staff up IRS and SSA, especially in the call center and customer-facing responsibilities, I offer that the Veterans Employment and Training Service at DOL is a place to go for that. They have the specific responsibility to support military spouse hiring and they have a network across the country through the workforce system that helps establish those kinds of relationships. And to the last point about how do we make the more flexible system work, and of course, I'm an advocate, as I've said many times, for the strategic reorientation of OPM. We've talked a lot about authorities that already exist, but that people do not take advantage of. And so I want to make sure that we consider the role of the oversight community, the IGs, the auditors, the lawyers. In many cases, there is a culture inside organizations about what is and is not acceptable, what was or was not allowed, but that's separate from what actually is permissible. And if we're going to reimagine the human capital system at the federal government, we need to make sure that the oversight community is engaged, because in many cases, they're the tacit setters of the permission framework within organizations.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chairwoman.